I'm Claire, 32 years old, and I never expected that inheriting my grandfather's lakeside cabin would turn my family against me. That sacred place filled with childhood memories became the center of a betrayal I never saw coming. After a grueling week at work, I drove 3 hours seeking solitude only to find my sister Melissa hosting a wild party with her friends. The shock of seeing her casually flash a key my parents gave her without my knowledge still makes my blood boil. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had family trample your boundaries. Now, let me tell you how this nightmare unfolded. Growing up, my grandfather William was my hero. While my parents were always busy with work and often preoccupied with my younger sister Melissa's demanding personality, Grandpa Will made me feel special. Every summer from the age of 7, I spent 2 weeks at his lakeside cabin in northern Wisconsin. Those were the happiest days of my childhood. The cabin itself isn't anything fancy. Built in the 1970s with 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, and a large living area, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Nakoma. What made it special was the feeling of peace it gave me. Sitting on the dock with Grandpa fishing at dawn while the mist rose off the water, learning to identify birds, or reading for hours in the window seat during thunderstorms. When my parents would fight, or when Melissa would throw one of her tantrums that seemed to consume all the oxygen in our house, I would close my eyes and mentally transport myself to the cabin. It became my safe place long before I understood the concept of mental health or coping mechanisms. Grandpa Will passed away last year at the age of 92. The loss hit me hard. He had been suffering from heart failure for several years, and though his death wasn't unexpected, the finality of it still knocked the wind out of me. I visited him in hospice every day for his final 3 weeks, often sitting quietly beside him, holding his hand as he slept. 2 weeks after the funeral, the family gathered at our parents' house for the reading of the will. I expected most of his estate would be divided equally between my father, his only child, or among his 3 grandchildren, Melissa, me, and our brother Jason, who lives in California. When the lawyer announced that Grandpa Will had left the cabin specifically to me, the room went silent. He'd left monetary gifts to everyone else, but the cabin was mine alone. The letter accompanying his will explained that he'd seen how much peace the cabin gave me, and he wanted me to always have that sanctuary. My father's face remained impassive, but my mother's lips thinned into a tight line. Melissa, who had hardly ever visited Grandpa, immediately began calculating the property value aloud. "That must be worth, what, 400,000 at least, the lakefront alone," she mused, looking at her boyfriend Troy. I felt simultaneously touched by my grandfather's thoughtfulness and uncomfortable with the sudden tension. "It's not about the money," I said quietly. "It's about the memories." Jason, who'd flown in from California, seemed genuinely happy for me. "That's perfect," he said. "You always were the cabin person in the family." My parents recovered quickly, at least on the surface. "What a lovely gesture," my mother said, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. My father nodded and patted my shoulder. "Your grandfather always knew what he was doing," he said. "You'll take good care of the place." After the initial shock wore off, I spent the next several months getting the cabin's paperwork in order. I paid the back taxes, had the septic system inspected, and updated the insurance policy in my name. Everything cost more than I expected, but I was determined to maintain the property properly. As a physical therapist at a busy rehabilitation center, I didn't make a fortune, but I was comfortable enough to handle the expenses if I budgeted carefully. Every other weekend, I would drive up to the cabin and work on small improvements. I repainted the kitchen, replaced some worn furniture, and learned basic plumbing repairs from YouTube videos. The physical work was therapeutic as I processed my grief over Grandpa's passing. I was creating something that honored him while making it my own. Occasionally, I invited my parents or Jason when he visited from California. I even invited Melissa and Troy once, though that visit ended with a broken glass coffee table that they insisted was already cracked, and some of my grandfather's fishing lures mysteriously missing. After that, I became more protective of who visited and when. It wasn't that I wanted to exclude my family entirely. I just needed them to respect that this was now my property, my sanctuary. I created a shared calendar where family could request dates to visit, giving me time to prepare and ensure it wouldn't disrupt my own plans for the space. Jason used it respectfully, requesting a weekend well in advance when he and his wife were visiting from California. My parents rarely requested time, saying they were too busy, though they frequently mentioned how Melissa could really use a getaway. I began to sense a pattern of Melissa's needs always coming before mine, a dynamic that had existed throughout our childhood, but was now spilling over into my adult property ownership. Still, I tried to maintain boundaries while being generous. This was my inheritance, my responsibility, and increasingly my dream for the future. I had plans to eventually rent it out as a vacation property for part of the year, creating a small income stream that would help maintain the cabin itself. If only I'd known then how little my boundaries would matter to my family. Perhaps I could have prevented the betrayal that was brewing just beneath the surface of their seeming acceptance. By October, my life had become increasingly hectic at work. Our rehabilitation center was understaffed, and I was working 50 to 60-hour weeks helping patients recover from surgeries and injuries. The physical and emotional demands of healthcare work were taking a toll, and I found myself desperately needing the peace that only the cabin could provide. I scheduled a 4-day weekend, the first substantial time off I'd taken in months. The autumn colors would be at their peak, and I envisioned peaceful walks in the woods cooking comfort food, and perhaps finally finishing the novel I'd been too exhausted to read. Just the thought of sitting by the fireplace with no demands on my time felt like oxygen to my depleted spirit. I didn't tell my family about my plans, partly because I'd grown weary of Melissa's hints about wanting to use the cabin, and partly because I truly needed solitude. This was to be my reset button after months of giving my energy to others. The drive up on Thursday evening felt like a gradual unwinding. Each mile farther from the city loosened another knot in my shoulders. I stopped at the small grocery store in the nearest town to stock up on provisions, splurging on good coffee, fresh bread from the local bakery, and ingredients for the hearty soups and stews I planned to make. As I turned onto the gravel road leading to the cabin, golden hour sunlight filtering through the flame-colored maple leaves, I felt a surge of anticipation. This was exactly what I needed. Then, rounding the final curve, my stomach dropped. 3 unfamiliar cars were parked haphazardly in the driveway, one of them partially on the lawn I'd carefully reseeded just a month ago. Through the large windows, I could see colored lights flashing inside, and even with my car windows closed, I could hear music thumping. For a moment, I wondered if I'd somehow taken a wrong turn. But no, this was definitely my cabin. My sanctuary was being invaded. I parked behind the line of cars and sat for a moment trying to process what was happening and calm my racing heart. Part of me wanted to turn around and drive away, rather than confront whatever was happening. But a stronger part, the part that had poured money and sweat and love into this place, propelled me toward the front door. The door was unlocked, and when I pushed it open, the scene that greeted me was worse than I'd imagined. At least 8 people were crowded into my living room. Empty pizza boxes and beer cans littered the coffee table. Someone had draped a sheet over my grandfather's prized collection of fishing lures mounted on the wall and was using it as a projection screen for music videos. The air was thick with the unmistakable smell of marijuana. And there, in the center of it all, was my sister Melissa, 29 years old, but behaving like a college freshman. She was perched on the arm of the sofa, laughing at something her boyfriend Troy was saying, a glass of red wine dangerously close to spilling onto my new area rug. It took a full 30 seconds for anyone to notice me standing in the doorway. Troy saw me first, his smile fading slightly. He nudged Melissa, who looked up with mild annoyance that quickly shifted to something more complicated when she recognized me. "Claire," she exclaimed a little too brightly. "What a surprise, I didn't know you were coming up this weekend." The music continued to pound as I struggled to form words through my shock. "This is my cabin," I finally managed. "Why would I need to announce my arrival? The better question is, why are you here with all these people?" Melissa stood up, swaying slightly as she crossed the room toward me. Don't be such a killjoy, sis. We're just having a little get-together. Troy's had a rough week at work and we all needed to blow off some steam. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a key ring, dangling it in front of me with a smug smile. Mom and Dad gave me a copy of the key. They said I could use it whenever I want. The blood rushed to my face so quickly I felt dizzy. They what? Yeah, they had a spare made a while ago. Said family should be able to use the cabin too. It's not like you're here all the time. I looked around at the strangers in my living space, at the mess they'd made, at the sheet covering my grandfather's cherished display. Someone had spilled something dark on the window seat cushion where I'd planned to spend hours reading. The throw pillows I'd carefully selected were on the floor one, with a cigarette burn clearly visible. "Turn off the music," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "Oh, come on, Claire. Don't be so uptight. Turn off the music now," I shouted, surprising even myself with the volume and fury in my voice. Troy sauntered over to the speaker and cut the sound, leaving an awkward silence. The other guests, most of whom I'd never met, shifted uncomfortably. "Everyone who doesn't own this cabin needs to leave. Now." My voice was shaking, but my resolve was absolute. One of Melissa's friends, a woman with blue hair, laughed nervously. "Is she serious?" "Yes, she's serious." Melissa rolled her eyes. "My sister, the property tyrant." "Melissa, this is my home. I inherited it legally. No one, not even our parents, has the right to give out keys without my knowledge or permission." "It's just a building," Melissa scoffed. "Why are you being so selfish?" One by one, the guests began gathering their belongings, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding. Troy, however, made no move to leave, instead crossing his arms and staring me down as if I were the intruder. "You too, Troy," I said firmly. "We drove 3 hours to get here," he protested. "We're staying the weekend. Your sister has just as much right to be here as you do." "No, she doesn't. I'm the legal owner, and I'm telling you both to leave." Melissa's face contorted with anger. "This is so typical of you, Claire. Always the perfect one, always Grandpa's favorite, and now you think you're too good to share with your own family." "This isn't about sharing. This is about respect and boundaries, neither of which you're showing right now." "Whatever, Mom and Dad are going to hear about this." She grabbed her purse and yanked Troy's arm. "Come on, let's go. My sister wants to be alone with her precious cabin." As they stomped out, Melissa turned at the doorway. "You know what, Claire? You care more about this stupid cabin than you do about your family. No wonder you're alone." The door slammed behind them, leaving me standing amidst the wreckage of what should have been my peaceful retreat. Only then did I notice that one of my grandfather's carved wooden birds, a red cardinal he'd made the year before he died, lay broken on the floor beside the fireplace. I sank onto the sofa, surrounded by the mess and the lingering smell of strangers, and for the first time since the funeral, I wept for my grandfather and the sanctuary that no longer felt entirely mine. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that would normally fill me with contentment. Instead, I awoke on the sofa where I'd eventually fallen asleep, my neck stiff and my mind heavy with the confrontation from the night before. I spent the morning cleaning up the aftermath of Melissa's impromptu party. 2 wine glasses had been broken, their stems snapped, and fragments ground into the rug. Someone had used my grandfather's vintage fishing magazines as coasters, leaving circular stains on the covers. The kitchen was a disaster, with crusty pans of half-eaten nachos congealing on the countertop and sticky spills inside the refrigerator. The broken cardinal I carefully wrapped in tissue paper, hoping I might find a way to repair it. It wasn't just a decorative object. It represented one of the last things my grandfather had created with his hands. The damage felt symbolic, a desecration of his memory as well as my property. As I scrubbed and sorted and cataloged the damage, my initial shock gave way to a simmering anger. Not just at Melissa and her entitled attitude, but at my parents. How could they have given her a key without even mentioning it to me? What gave them the right to decide who had access to my property? By mid-morning, I couldn't avoid the inevitable any longer. I needed to confront my parents about their role in this violation. With the cabin somewhat restored to order, I sat on the deck overlooking the lake and dialed their number. My mother answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cheerful. "Claire, honey, are you calling about Thanksgiving plans?" I was thinking we could. Mom, I interrupted. Did you and Dad give Melissa a key to my cabin? There was a brief pause. Oh, she told you about that. No, Mom, she didn't tell me. I found out when I arrived at my cabin last night to find her hosting a party with a bunch of strangers. Well, I'm sure they were just having a little fun. Her tone was dismissive. Young people need space to socialize. They damaged my property. They broke one of Grandpa's carved birds. They left a huge mess that I spent all morning cleaning up. Accidents happen, dear. I'm sure Melissa didn't mean for anything to get broken. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Mom, the issue isn't just the damage. It's that you gave my sister a key to my property without asking me. You told her she could use it whenever she wants. That's not your decision to make. Claire, it's a family cabin. Your grandfather would have wanted everyone to enjoy it. If that's what he wanted, he would have left it to the entire family. He didn't. He left it specifically to me. I heard my father's voice in the background asking what was going on. My mother must have filled him in because he soon took over the call. Now listen here, Claire. His authoritative tone immediately set my teeth on edge. Your mother and I have always taught you kids to share. This business of keeping the cabin all to yourself isn't right. Dad, I'm not keeping it all to myself. I've invited you both up multiple times. I even created a calendar system so family could request time here. What I object to is having my privacy invaded and my property damaged without my knowledge or consent. We had that spare key from when your grandfather was alive, he explained as if talking to a child. It seemed only fair that your sister should be able to use the place too. She doesn't have the advantages you've had. This was a familiar refrain. Despite the fact that my parents had paid for Melissa's failed attempts at college while I worked my way through with scholarships and part-time jobs, they always positioned her as somehow disadvantaged compared to me. What advantages, Dad? I work 50-hour weeks helping people recover from injuries and surgeries. I budget carefully to maintain this cabin. I've invested thousands of dollars and countless hours into keeping it in good condition. That's your choice, he said dismissively. Melissa needs a place where she can relax and entertain her friends. That job at the mall doesn't pay much, and Troy's between opportunities right now. I nearly choked on the unfairness of it all. So I'm supposed to provide a free party house for my sister and her unemployed boyfriend because they can't afford their own entertainment. Don't be crude, Claire. We're talking about family helping family. No, we're talking about my boundaries being completely disregarded. I need you both to understand something clearly. This cabin belongs to me, legally. No one else has the right to use it without my permission. I want all spare keys returned immediately, and I want you to make it clear to Melissa that what happened last night was not okay and cannot happen again. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, my mother's voice returned tight with disapproval. I think you're being very selfish, Claire. Very selfish indeed. This isn't how we raised you. Actually, Mom, this is exactly how you raised me. To work hard for what I have and to stand up for myself when something isn't right. Well, my father cut back in. Don't be surprised if the rest of the family has some thoughts about your attitude. Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda were hoping to use the cabin for their anniversary next month. I guess we'll have to tell them the new owner is too precious about her property to share it with family. The manipulation was so transparent, it would have been laughable if it wasn't so hurtful. If Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda want to use the cabin, they can contact me directly and ask. That's called respect, Dad. This conversation is going nowhere, my mother sighed dramatically. When you've calmed down and are ready to be reasonable, give us a call. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there holding my phone looking out at the peaceful lake that suddenly felt anything but peaceful. The conversation had confirmed what I'd feared in my family's eyes. My ownership of the cabin was theoretical, my boundaries optional, and my feelings inconsequential compared to Melissa's desires. What had been planned as a restorative weekend now felt tainted by family drama. I tried to recapture some sense of peace by taking a long walk along the lakeshore, but my mind kept circling back to the conversation and all its implications. Had my parents always dismissed my needs so casually? Had I been naive to think they would respect my legal ownership of the property? By Sunday evening, when I packed up to return to the city, I had barely touched my novel, hadn't made any of the meals I'd planned, and felt more exhausted than when I'd arrived. My sanctuary had been invaded not just physically by Melissa and her friends, but emotionally by the realization that my family didn't respect me as an adult with the right to set my own boundaries. As I locked the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a larger battle, one I never wanted, but couldn't afford to lose if I was to preserve not just the cabin, but my autonomy and self-respect. Back in my apartment in the city, I hoped the cabin drama would blow over. Maybe my parents would recognize they were in the wrong, or at least Melissa would be embarrassed enough by the confrontation to back off. I was wrong on both counts. Within days, my phone began filling with cold, formal messages from extended family members. "Heard about your decision regarding the family cabin," wrote my cousin Patrick. "Pretty disappointing." My Aunt Margaret, who hadn't visited the cabin in at least 15 years, sent a lengthy text about family legacy and how William would be heartbroken to see me hoarding the property. It became clear that Melissa was controlling the narrative. A quick check of her social media confirmed my suspicions. Though she didn't name me directly, her passive-aggressive posts about privileged people who don't appreciate what they have and toxic family members who choose property over people were obviously directed at me. Worse, the comment sections were filled with sympathetic responses from relatives and friends alike, none of whom knew the full story. 2 weeks after the incident, my mother organized a family dinner ostensibly to discuss Thanksgiving arrangements, but clearly designed to put me on the spot. I considered not going, but decided facing them directly was better than letting rumors and misrepresentations flourish unchallenged. The tension was palpable from the moment I arrived. Melissa sat beside our mother, their heads close together in conspiratorial solidarity. My father maintained a cool civility, while my uncle and his wife visiting from Minnesota regarded me with barely concealed disapproval. Throughout the meal, pointed comments flew like arrows. "Some people are natural givers," my mother observed, patting Melissa's hand. "Others are takers." My uncle reminisced about family gatherings at our lake place, as if the cabin had always been communal property. No one mentioned the party, the damage, or the unauthorized key. I maintained my composure, refusing to be baited into an argument that would only position me as the villain in their narrative. After dinner, however, my Aunt Susan, my late grandfather's sister, asked me to help her get something from her car. Once outside, she turned to me with concern in her eyes. "Claire, I want you to know that I understand what you're going through. William was my brother, and I know exactly what he intended with that cabin." Relief flooded through me at this unexpected ally. "Thank you, Aunt Susan. I feel like I'm going crazy with everyone acting like I'm being unreasonable." "You're not the unreasonable one," she assured me. "And there's something you should know. Melissa hasn't just used the cabin once or twice. She's been using it regularly for months now, since right after the will was read." My stomach dropped. "Months. How do you know?" "Remember Linda Peterson? She and her husband have the cabin 2 doors down from yours. We play bridge together. She mentioned seeing a lot of activity at William's old place. Young people coming and going at all hours, cars parked all over. She asked if I knew who the party girl was who kept bringing different groups up there." The betrayal cut even deeper than I'd imagined. Why didn't anyone tell me? "Linda only mentioned it recently. And honestly, I assumed you knew and had given permission. It wasn't until I heard about your confrontation that I put the pieces together." When I returned home that night, I began a more thorough investigation. A systematic check of the cabin revealed items I hadn't noticed were missing: my grandfather's antique fishing reel, a small jewelry box that had belonged to my grandmother, and several pieces of the better quality kitchenware I'd recently purchased. More disturbing still was what I found on social media. Using a friend's account to view posts I wouldn't normally see, I discovered dozens of photos and videos taken at the cabin over the past several months. Melissa posing with different groups on girls' weekends, Troy and his friends playing poker at my dining table, even a video tour where Melissa referred to my lake house while showing off the renovations I'd paid for. The most shocking discovery was a photo of someone I didn't recognize wearing my grandfather's treasured fly fishing vest, posing mockingly with one of his handmade rods. Another showed strangers sleeping in my bed, empty bottles and food containers scattered across my bedside table. When I confronted Melissa about the missing items, particularly our grandparents' belongings, she responded with indignant denial. "I haven't taken anything from your precious cabin. Maybe if you weren't so paranoid about people touching your things, you'd keep better track of them." My parents were no more supportive. "Are you seriously accusing your sister of stealing?" my mother asked aghast. "Those things probably got misplaced during one of your cleaning frenzies. Or maybe you're just looking for more reasons to keep everyone away from a place that should be shared." "This isn't about sharing," I tried to explain for what felt like the 100th time. "This is about respect and honesty. Melissa has been using my cabin for months without permission, allowing strangers to handle family heirlooms, and now items are missing." "Things," my father said dismissively, "are just things, Claire. If you're so concerned about material possessions that you'd accuse your own sister of theft, perhaps you need to reevaluate your priorities." The conversation culminated in an ultimatum that left me speechless. Either I would formalize a sharing arrangement that gave Melissa equal access to the cabin, or I could expect to be treated as an outsider by the entire family. My mother went so far as to suggest that perhaps I should skip the upcoming holidays until you've thought about what family really means. As I drove home that night, I felt a strange calm descend. The situation had moved beyond simple boundary violations into something more fundamentally broken. For the first time, I could see clearly that this wasn't really about the cabin at all. It was about a family dynamic that had never properly valued my autonomy, my needs, or my right to self-determination. The choice before me wasn't really about property. It was about whether I would continue to participate in a system that required me to diminish myself in order to belong. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in over a year. What I needed to do couldn't wait, and frankly, I wasn't in any state to help patients when my own life was in such turmoil. Then I made 3 important calls. The first was to a locksmith who specialized in vacation properties. By that afternoon, I had an appointment to have all the locks changed on the cabin, along with a new security system installation, complete with cameras that would send alerts to my phone. The second call was to a lawyer recommended by a colleague. Jessica Barnes specialized in property law and family disputes. She listened carefully to my situation without judgment. "Legally, your position is clear," she assured me. "The cabin is deeded to you. No one, not even parents, has the right to distribute keys or access without the owner's permission. What we're dealing with here is a family boundary issue, not a legal gray area." She recommended sending a formal cease and desist letter to both my parents and Melissa, documenting the unauthorized access and making it clear that future trespassing would have legal consequences. It seemed extreme, but given how completely my verbal boundaries had been ignored, I agreed it was necessary. The third call was the hardest to my brother Jason in California. We weren't especially close, our relationship congenial, but distant, due to geography and different life paths. Still, he was the only immediate family member who might understand my position. To my relief, Jason was supportive. "Claire, you don't need to justify protecting what's legally yours. Honestly, it doesn't surprise me that Melissa feels entitled to your property. She's been the center of the family universe for as long as I can remember." His validation of patterns I'd observed but doubted was both comforting and saddening. "Mom and Dad mean well," he continued, "but they've always had a blind spot when it comes to Melissa. They confuse enabling with supporting." By the end of the week, the locks had been changed, the security system installed, and the formal letters delivered. The response was swift and furious. Troy, who I'd always found intimidating in his barely contained aggression, sent a text that bordered on threatening. "You think some locked doors will keep us away from what belongs to the family? Think again, princess." My mother called in tears, asking what had happened to her sweet little girl and why I was declaring war on my own family. My father's approach was more direct. He and my mother showed up unannounced at my apartment on Saturday morning. "We need to talk about this ridiculous letter," he announced, pushing past me into my living room. "Certified mail Claire legal threats. This is beyond acceptable behavior." I remained standing, unwilling to settle in for what was clearly planned as a lengthy manipulation session. My behavior is the issue, not the fact that you gave someone else unauthorized access to my legal property, not the damage that's been done, or the items that have gone missing. We had every right, my mother insisted. That key was given to us by your grandfather. We've always had access to that cabin. And now you don't, I said simply. The locks have been changed and the property is monitored. Anyone attempting to enter without my express permission will be recorded, and I won't hesitate to report trespassing. My father's face reddened. You would call the police on your own family over a building. If necessary, yes. This isn't about the building, Dad. It's about respect for my boundaries, my legal rights, and my inheritance from Grandpa. Your grandfather, my mother said, her voice quivering with emotion, or perhaps calculated effect, always liked you best. He made that abundantly clear in his will. But don't you think it's time to even things out a bit? Your sister hasn't had the advantages you've had. What advantages, Mom, really? I want to know what these mysterious advantages are that justify giving my sister permission to use my property without even asking me. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Finally, my father sighed heavily. The truth is, Claire, we're having some financial difficulties. The business isn't doing as well as it used to. This was news to me. My father's construction company had always seemed stable, if not wildly successful. What does that have to do with Melissa using my cabin? Another loaded glance between them. We may have mentioned to the bank that we had access to a valuable property if additional collateral was needed for a loan, my father admitted reluctantly. The audacity took my breath away. You were planning to use my cabin, which isn't even in your names, as collateral for a loan. That's not just unethical, it's potentially fraudulent. It wouldn't have come to that, my father insisted. But having the option gave us some flexibility in negotiations. And that's why you gave Melissa a key to establish some sort of claim on the property. Don't be ridiculous, my mother interjected. We gave her the key because she needs a place to hold her events. She's trying to build a social media presence as an influencer, and having access to a photogenic lake house is part of her brand strategy. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. So I'm supposed to provide a free backdrop for Melissa's Instagram career. Does she even have a job anymore? The mall position didn't work out, my mother admitted. But this influencer path could be very lucrative. Troy is helping her with the business side of things. The pieces were falling into place. And the wedding Aunt Susan mentioned something about wedding plans. My mother at least had the grace to look slightly abashed. We may have told Melissa she could have her wedding at the lake. It would save so much money and, Troy's family can't contribute much. Let me get this straight, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Without consulting me, you promised Melissa she could have her wedding at my cabin, gave her a key to use it as a backdrop for social media photos, and considered using it as loan collateral for your business. And I'm the one being unreasonable. When you put it like that, it sounds bad, my father conceded. But family helps family, Claire. That's what your grandfather would have wanted. No, I said firmly. Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing when he left the cabin to me specifically. He knew I would care for it, respect it, and preserve what made it special. What you're describing isn't family helping family. It's family exploiting family. The conversation deteriorated from there. Accusations flew, old hurts were dredged up, and the fundamental disconnect in our perspectives became increasingly apparent. By the time they left, my parents had made it clear either I acquiesced to their demands regarding the cabin, or I would effectively be cut off from the family. After they left, I experienced my first full-blown panic attack in years. Sitting on my kitchen floor, struggling to breathe, I questioned everything. Was I being selfish? Was a building worth losing my family over? Was I missing something fundamental about how families were supposed to function? When the physical symptoms subsided, I called my friend Diane, the one person I knew would give me an honest but compassionate perspective. Claire, she said, after listening to the whole sordid story, what would you tell a patient who came to you with this situation? If someone told you their family was demanding they give up legal property, ignoring their clearly stated boundaries and threatening to cut them off if they didn't comply. What would you say? Put that way, the answer was clear. I'd tell them they were in an emotionally abusive situation and needed to protect themselves. Exactly. The fact that it's your family doesn't make it okay. It makes it worse because they're exploiting your love and your desire to belong to manipulate you. By the end of our conversation, I felt steadier. The path forward wasn't easy, but it was clear. I would stand my ground, protect what was legally mine, and let the family dynamics play out as they would. If maintaining healthy boundaries cost me relationships with people who couldn't respect those boundaries, perhaps those weren't relationships worth preserving in their current form. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a security alert. The cabin cameras had detected movement on the porch. I opened the app to see Melissa and Troy at the front door attempting to use their old key. When it didn't work, they tried the windows. Finding those secured as well, Troy's frustration boiled over. He picked up a large rock from the landscaping and smashed one of the smaller side windows. The alarm immediately triggered, its shrill beeping audible even through the camera's audio. Melissa and Troy fled to their car and sped away, but not before the cameras captured clear images of their faces and license plate. I was due for a weekend at the cabin anyway, so I took Friday off and drove up early to assess and repair the damage. The broken window was relatively minor compared to the violation I felt knowing they had tried to force their way in, despite all warnings and boundaries. While getting supplies at the local hardware store, I ran into my grandfather's old friend Harold, who owned the bait shop next door. "Claire, good to see you. How are things at Will's old place?" "Complicated," I admitted, explaining the situation in broad strokes. Harold shook his head. "Doesn't surprise me one bit. Your grandfather worried about something like this happening. It's why he left the place specifically to you." This was news to me. "What do you mean?" "Will and I talked a lot those last few years. He saw the way your sister acted when she did visit. Entitled, disrespectful of the property. And your parents always making excuses for her. Will knew you'd honor the spirit of the place, not just see it as an asset to exploit." His words were a balm to my wounded spirit. At least someone understood my grandfather's intentions and my desire to protect them. After repairing the window, I settled in for what I hoped would be a peaceful Saturday. Around noon, however, I spotted Melissa's car pulling into the diner across from the general store in town. I decided it was time for a direct confrontation away from the cabin, and without Troy's intimidating presence. I walked into the diner and slid into the booth across from my sister without invitation. Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed defensively. "Stalking me now?" she asked. "I was already here for the weekend. The better question is why you're in town after being explicitly told not to come to the cabin." Melissa looked down at her coffee. "Troy wanted to check if the new locks were real or just a bluff." "Well, now he knows. And so does the sheriff's department since I filed a report about the broken window." Her head snapped up. "You called the cops on us." "I filed a property damage report. I have video of Troy breaking the window, Melissa. This has gone beyond family squabbling into criminal behavior." To my surprise, her eyes filled with tears. Not the calculated, manipulative tears I'd seen her use on our parents countless times, but genuine distress. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need that cabin." "Why? Why is my property suddenly so essential to your life?" She looked around to ensure no one was listening, then leaned forward. "Troy lost his job 6 months ago. The startup failed. We're behind on rent, and his credit is shot from the business loans. Mom and Dad have been helping, but they're stretched thin too. The cabin was supposed to be our fallback." "Fallback for what?" "For everything. A free place to stay if we get evicted. A wedding venue we don't have to pay for. A backdrop for the social media content I'm trying to build a business around." She wiped at her eyes. "I know it sounds pathetic, but I'm drowning here, Claire. Everything I try fails. Troy's getting desperate, which makes him mean. The cabin was the one bright spot, the one place I felt like I had options." For the first time, I felt a glimmer of genuine sympathy for my sister. Not enough to hand over my property, but enough to see that her entitlement was rooted in genuine fear and insecurity. "Melissa, I'm sorry you're struggling. But using my cabin without permission, allowing it to be damaged, possibly taking family heirlooms, that wasn't the way to ask for help. I didn't take anything, she insisted, though her eyes slid away from mine. Maybe some of Troy's friends did. Things got out of hand sometimes. That's exactly why I can't just give you open access. It's not just about the building. It's about respect for what the place means to me, for Grandpa's memory, for my legal rights as the owner. Our conversation continued, revealing layers of resentment, jealousy, and misunderstanding that had been building for years. Melissa admitted she'd always been jealous of my relationship with our grandfather and my ability to have it all together, as she put it. I acknowledged that I'd sometimes been judgmental of her choices and distant when perhaps she'd needed support. We were making genuine, if tenuous, progress when the diner door banged open and Troy stormed in, his face flushed with anger. "There you are," he growled at Melissa. "Let's go. Now." The vulnerable, reflective sister I'd been speaking with vanished, instantly replaced by the defensive, combative version who aligned herself with Troy against the world. She slid out of the booth, avoiding my eyes. "Melissa," I said quietly, "you don't have to go with him." Troy's glare could have melted steel. "Mind your own business, Claire. You've done enough damage to this family." As they left, I sat there wondering how a simple inheritance had unearthed such profound dysfunction in my family. It wasn't about the cabin anymore. It was about patterns of behavior that had been established long ago and never challenged until now. That evening, I received a text from my mother. "Family meeting tomorrow at our house, 2 p.m. Everyone will be there. Time to resolve this situation once and for all." The tone left little doubt that this was planned as an intervention against me, not a genuine attempt at resolution. Still, I decided to go. If nothing else, I wanted the opportunity to state my position clearly to everyone at once, rather than have it filtered through my parents' or Melissa's distorted perspective. The scene when I arrived was exactly as I'd anticipated. The living room was full of family members. Some I saw regularly, others I hadn't spoken to in years. My parents sat in the center, Melissa beside them, looking simultaneously victimized and vindicated. Troy lurked in the corner, his presence an implicit threat. What followed was less a discussion than an orchestrated attack. One by one, relatives took turns explaining why my selfishness was tearing the family apart. My cousin recounted childhood memories of family gatherings at the cabin, as if my grandfather's decision to leave it to me had robbed everyone of their rightful access. My uncle suggested that perhaps the will could be contested if I wasn't willing to be reasonable. Even my normally quiet aunt joined in, suggesting that my grandfather wasn't in his right mind toward the end, and might not have intended the cabin to be exclusively mine. I listened to it all without interruption. When the room finally fell silent, all eyes on me expectantly, I stood up. "I've heard all of you," I began calmly, "and I want to be clear about a few things. First, my grandfather was of sound mind when he made his will. He left the cabin to me because he trusted me to care for it the way he did. Second, I have never refused reasonable requests from family to use the cabin. What I object to is having my explicit boundaries violated, my property damaged, and my character assassinated for having the audacity to expect basic respect." I turned to my parents. "You had no right to give out keys to my property without my knowledge or permission. No right to promise the cabin for Melissa's wedding, or as collateral for loans, or as a backdrop for social media content. To Melissa, you had no right to enter my property without permission to call it your lake house, to allow strangers to handle family heirlooms, or to damage what doesn't belong to you." And finally, to the assembled family, "And none of you has the right to tell me what I should do with property that is legally mine. If this family only accepts me if I give up my autonomy and legal rights, then perhaps this isn't a family I want to be part of right now." The silence was deafening. My mother was the first to recover. "If you walk out that door, Claire, don't expect to be welcome back until you've changed your attitude." I looked around the room one last time at the faces of people who claimed to love me but couldn't respect my most basic boundaries. My attitude isn't the problem, and until you can all see that I think some distance might be the healthiest choice for everyone. With that, I walked out, ignoring the eruption of voices behind me. In my car, I sat for several minutes, trembling with adrenaline and emotion. There was grief for the family relationships I'd valued, anger at the manipulation I'd endured, but also a strange sense of liberation. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had stood firmly for myself without qualification or compromise. I drove to a nearby hotel rather than returning to my apartment. I needed neutral space to process what had just happened and what it meant for my future. That night alone in an anonymous room, I mourned not just the family gathering I'd left behind, but the illusion of a family that had never truly existed in the form I'd wanted to believe. The following morning, I received an unexpected message. Not from my parents or Melissa, but from Linda Peterson, my grandfather's neighbor at the lake. Aunt Susan had apparently shared my contact information with her. Claire, I don't want to intrude on family matters, but I feel I should share what I've observed at your cabin over the past year. Call if you'd like to discuss. I called immediately. Linda was hesitant at first, clearly uncomfortable being in the middle of a family dispute, but ultimately shared detailed observations of multiple large gatherings at the cabin when I wasn't present. Most disturbing was her description of an incident in late summer when the noise had been so disruptive that her husband had considered calling the police. Your sister, at least I assume it was your sister, was always polite when we complained, Linda explained. But the young man with her was quite aggressive, suggesting we mind our own business and that they had every right to enjoy the property. Linda's account confirmed what I'd suspected and provided independent verification that the unauthorized use of my cabin wasn't an isolated incident, but a sustained pattern. I thanked her for her honesty and promised to be a more considerate neighbor than my sister had been. After the call, I reached out to several of my grandfather's old friends. Their reminiscences about his love for the cabin and his pride in how I'd always appreciated its simple beauty reinforced my conviction that I was honoring his wishes by protecting it. The next few months were difficult. True to their word, my parents maintained a frigid distance. Holiday invitations were pointedly not extended. Melissa blocked me on all social media platforms. The extended family largely followed my parents' lead, with a few notable exceptions who reached out privately to express support, or at least neutrality. I decided to take a break from the cabin drama altogether. I found a reliable property management company that specialized in vacation homes and arranged for them to check on the place regularly. I even had them find a responsible tenant for a 3-month lease, a retired professor writing a book who appreciated the solitude and treated the property with respect. The distance gave me time to focus on my own healing. I began seeing a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and boundary issues. Dr. Marshall helped me understand that the cabin had merely been the catalyst for confronting dysfunctional patterns that had existed in my family for decades. Your inheritance forced everyone to show their true colors, she observed during one session. Your sister's entitlement, your parents' enabling behavior, the family's disregard for your autonomy, none of that started with the cabin. The cabin just made it impossible to ignore anymore. Through our work together, I began to recognize how I had participated in these patterns as well, sometimes avoiding conflict at the expense of my own needs, other times withdrawing entirely, rather than engaging in difficult conversations. I learned that standing up for myself wasn't selfish, and that healthy relationships required mutual respect, not just from others toward me, but from me toward myself. 6 months after the family meeting showdown, I received a text from Melissa. Can we talk just us? We met at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our homes. The Melissa who arrived was subdued, lacking the defensive energy that had characterized our interactions for as long as I could remember. Troy and I broke up, she announced without preamble. Or rather, I kicked him out after I found out he'd been cheating. With 2 different women. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. Whatever my feelings about Troy, I knew Melissa had genuinely cared for him. She shrugged, stirring her latte absently. It was overdue. He wasn't good for me. Made me feel like I was never enough on my own, like I had to keep proving my worth by getting things for him. The cabin was part of that. He was obsessed with it, with what it represented. Free luxury status, an easy solution to our money problems. We talked for nearly 3 hours. Without Troy's influence and separated from our parents' dynamics, Melissa showed a self-awareness I'd rarely seen in her before. She admitted to taking our grandmother's jewelry box, though she insisted the fishing gear must have been taken by Troy's friends without her knowledge. She acknowledged her resentment of my relationship with our grandfather, and her feelings of inadequacy that she'd tried to compensate for by claiming things that weren't hers. "I'm not asking for a key again," she clarified when the conversation turned to the future. "I know I destroyed that trust, but I would like to find a way back to being sisters. Real sisters, not competitors or enemies." It was the beginning of a slow reconciliation, not just with Melissa, but eventually with my parents as well, though that process was more complex and fraught. My father's business stabilized somewhat, removing some of the financial pressure that had contributed to their desperate schemes involving my property. My mother, seeing Melissa beginning to establish healthier patterns, gradually loosened her protective grip and became more receptive to examining her own role in the family dysfunction. By the following summer, I felt secure enough to invite them all to the cabin for a day visit, carefully structured and with clear expectations. It wasn't perfect. Old habits occasionally surfaced, boundaries needed to be restated, and there were moments of tension. But there was also laughter, genuine conversation, and the tentative formation of new, healthier patterns of interaction. I still maintained sole ownership and control of the cabin, but as my confidence in my family's respect for my boundaries grew, I became more comfortable sharing access on my terms. I created a formal written agreement that family members could sign if they wanted to use the cabin, acknowledging my ownership and agreeing to specific rules about care guests and scheduling. The cabin itself continued to evolve under my stewardship. I completed many of the renovations my grandfather had planned but never finished. I added solar panels to reduce the environmental footprint. I maintained his garden of native plants, learning their names and needs just as he had taught me. And in the front hallway, I hung a newly carved wooden cardinal created by a local artisan to replace the one that had been broken, a symbol of both what had been lost and what could be rebuilt with care and intention. On quiet evenings, sitting on the dock watching the sunset, just as I had with my grandfather, I often reflected on the painful journey that had led to this moment of peace. The inheritance had cost me more than I ever anticipated, stripping away comforting illusions about my family and forcing me to stand alone in ways I'd never imagined. But it had also given me something precious, the knowledge that I could honor both my grandfather's legacy and my own worth, that I could lose a version of family and find a truer one on the other side, and that sometimes protecting what's yours is the first step toward creating something better for everyone. Have you ever had to stand your ground with family, even when it meant risking relationships? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people we love most. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect what's rightfully theirs. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, true family supports your growth, not just their own needs.